The lights were sharp, unforgiving, the kind that reveal every twitch, every glance. Across the table, Elon Musk leaned back in his chair as though the studio itself was his empire, every person in it his subject. Cameras whirred, microphones hovered, the atmosphere buzzing with the quiet tension of live broadcast. Viewers at home tuned in expecting a spirited exchange. What they got was something no one would forget. Musk's voice cut through the air, slow and deliberate, as if savoring every syllable. "You know, Jasmine," he said, almost smirking, "if you ever worked for me, you wouldn't last a week. Honestly, people like you, I'd fire you before the ink dried on your contract." The words weren't tossed off casually. They were a shot fired, a warning cloaked in arrogance. A ripple moved through the studio-audible gasps, shifting bodies, the uneasy silence that falls when a line has been crossed. His smile widened, basking in the discomfort he'd manufactured. Jasmine Crockett sat across from him, unmoving. Her hands rested calmly on the table, her eyes fixed not on the billionaire's smirk, but somewhere steadier, deeper. If Musk was playing to the crowd, she was listening for something truer, the weight of the moment. The millions of viewers who'd recognize in his words a familiar kind of contempt. And that was the power of it. This wasn't just about two people trading barbs on live television. It was about every worker who'd been threatened with losing their livelihood. Every woman who'd been told to stay quiet. Every voice Musk thought he could mute with money. The moderator shifted uncomfortably, glancing between them, but it was too late to intervene. The silence stretched, charged with expectation. On social media, clips of Musk's words were already exploding across timelines. Reactions piling up before the conversation had even moved on. The room. The audience, the millions watching, everyone leaned in, waiting for her response. Because what could someone possibly say to a man who believed he could fire the world? But Jasmine Crockett did not flinch, did not rush. She let the arrogance hang in the air, heavy as a storm cloud. Then, with the same calm that had unnerved her opponents in Congress, she drew a breath. And that was the moment everything began to shift. Because Jasmine's response wasn't what Elon Musk expected. Asterisk in that suspended silence after Elon Musk's jab, the stakes became instantly clear. This was not just a billionaire throwing shade for the sake of theatrics. This was Elon Musk, the man who could move markets with a tweet, who could lay off thousands with a single email, who had reshaped entire industries with the flick of his ambition, using his platform to belittle a sitting congresswoman. His words were not light. They carried the weight of power unchecked, arrogance magnified by wealth. Every person in the room knew it. Every viewer watching online could feel it. This was a confrontation that extended beyond the two figures on stage. It was a test of who gets to define dignity in America, the billionaire with global influence, the elected representative who came from working-class grit. Musk leaned into the moment, his confidence radiating. He was used to this dynamic, the disruptor who thrived on provocation. He believed no one could match his reach, his resources, his cult-like following. To him, firing back at Crockett was sport, performance to reinforce his narrative that he was untouchable, above scrutiny, above consequence, and that was the danger. Because if Jasmine Crockett faltered here, if she hesitated or stumbled, the story would be Musk's to own. The headlines would not read about his arrogance, they would celebrate his dominance. Millions would walk away thinking, once again, that wealth equaled wisdom. That silence meant submission, but Crockett represented something Musk could never buy. She wasn't just one woman holding her ground. She was the echo of millions who had stood in front of bosses, landlords, politicians, and been told their voices didn't matter. She carried the weight of those denied a seat at the table. And tonight, the cameras ensured the table could no longer ignore her presence. The tension was electric, almost unbearable. On social media, the comments lit up in real time. Some mocked her, predicting she would fold. Others urged her on, typing furiously, "Don't let him bully you. Show him who you are." Hashtags began bubbling. Hashtag Musk vs Crockett. Hashtag Power vs People. The digital battlefield was already alive before she had uttered a word. And still she sat there, posed, her expression unreadable. To Musk, her calm must have looked like weakness, like hesitation. But to those watching closely, it was something else entirely. The gathering of a storm. The patience of someone who knew that a single moment could rewrite the narrative. That was the drama unfolding in real time. If she cracked, Musk would win the night, cementing his role as the alpha provocateur. But if she struck back not with rage, not with bluster, but with precision, then his smirk would be the last laugh he got. The audience leaned closer, sensing that possibility. They could feel that Musk had overplayed his hand, that the arrogance of his words had created an opening. The question was whether Jasmine Crockett would take it, whether she had the composure to turn insult into opportunity. The answer was coming. And when it did, it wouldn't just be a reply, it would be the spark that ignited something larger than either of them. Because in that moment, lived for the entire country to see. The balance of power was about to shift, and what happened next would leave the world in disbelief. Asterisk to understand the magnitude of what unfolded on that stage. You have to understand Elon Musk, not the myth. Not the headlines that paint him as a genius innovator, but the contradictions that define him, the reckless arrogance that shadows his brilliance. Because Musk is not merely a businessman. He is a figure who embodies both the awe and the fear of 21st century power. For decades, he has been praised as the man who dreamed bigger than anyone else. Electric cars that redefined an industry. Rockets that touched the edge of space. A global satellite network promising internet from the skies. Musk cultivated the image of a visionary who bent the future to his will. To millions, he is an icon, the daring immigrant who dared the impossible and made it real. But behind that myth is a man equally known for chaos, sometimes deliberate, sometimes careless, always disruptive. He fires off tweets that wipe billions off the stock market, mocks critics with schoolyard insults, and makes promises with the confidence of a prophet, only to abandon them with the shrug of a child. One moment he is hailed as the savior of clean energy. The next, he's in court facing accusations of fraud, and perhaps nowhere was his arrogance more visible than at Twitter or X. As he rechristened it, when he took over the platform, he promised to turn it into a utopia of free speech. But his first act? A firing spree so ruthless it left entire teams decimated overnight. Thousands of employees received cold emails, stripped of their livelihoods with no warning. Whole department safety, moderation, accessibility vanished in hours. To Musk, it was efficiency. To those who watched, it was cruelty dressed up as leadership. The contradictions did not end there. Musk proclaimed himself a defender of open dialogue, yet anyone who crossed him quickly learned the price. Journalists who investigated him found their accounts suspended. Activists who challenged his policies were silenced under vague new rules. He talked about liberty while wielding the platform like a weapon, muting dissent when it threatened his ego. The self-proclaimed free speech warrior had built a fortress where his voice was amplified, and his critics were crushed. Asterisk. This was the Elon Musk who sat across from Jasmine Crockett. Not just a billionaire, not just an inventor, but a man whose power came with no restraint. Admired by millions, feared by just as many, and always convinced that his fortune gave him the right to decide who mattered and who didn't. His arrogance was not hidden, it was his brand. He mocked regulators trying to keep Tesla cars safe. Once tweeting that government agencies were nothing more than fun police, he dismissed entire countries when their leaders challenged him, threatening to pull factories and jobs unless they bent to his terms. He treated the world like his chessboard and everyone else as pawns. Asterisk, and yet, despite his recklessness, people kept watching. Because there is something intoxicating about Musk's defiance, even when it veers into absurdity. He plays the role of both genius and tyrant, pulling the audience into his drama, daring them to choose between admiration and disgust. But here's the truth. Brilliance without humility curdles into arrogance. Innovation without accountability turns dangerous. And Musk, for all his achievements, had become a man convinced that no one could stand against him. Not regulators, not journalists, not politicians, not even the truth itself. Asterisk that is why his clash with Jasmine Crockett mattered. Because when Musk leaned across that table and threatened to fire hers, if she were just another employee on his payroll, he wasn't simply insulting one woman. He was reenacting the same story he had told for years, that wealth equals control, that he can silence anyone he chooses. Only this time the stage was not Silicon Valley. It was not Twitter. It was not a corporate boardroom stacked with people too afraid to speak up. This time, it was live, unedited, raw. And this time, the person across from him was not just another critic, but a woman forged in the fires of struggle, elected by the people to stand firm when others bowed, in Elon Musk. Viewers saw the villain of the story take shape, not a comic book caricature, but a real man whose unchecked ego had grown larger than his accomplishments. And in that recognition, they leaned forward, eager to see what happened when unstoppable arrogance finally met immovable dignity. Because Musk believed he had already won the moment. What he didn't know was that Jasmine Crockett was about to show the world how quickly power can crumble when it underestimates truth. Asterisk. To understand why Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch when Elon Musk threw his casual threat across that table, you have to go back to where she came from. Because Crockett was never supposed to sit in rooms like this, rooms where billionaires speak as if they rule the world. She was the daughter of Texas, raised far from the gilded boardrooms of Silicon Valley. Forged not in luxury, but in grit. From an early age, Crockett knew what it meant to fight for space in a world that tried to shrink her. As a young black girl growing up in the South, she learned quickly that her voice would not always be welcomed. Teachers underestimated her. Neighbors whispered doubts. Society offered the same old script. People like her were supposed to stay in the margins, not rewrite the story. But Jasmine refused to shrink. She sharpened her voice, carried herself with a dignity that couldn't be erased, and chose a path that would test her resolve again and again. The law school was not easy. Not when you were often the only woman of color in the room. Not when professors doubted your potential before you even opened your mouth. But Crockett didn't just study the law, she embodied it. She saw it as more than statutes and codes. For her, the law was a shield for the powerless, a tool to balance scales that had been tilted for too long. She became a lawyer not for prestige, but for justice. And justice, in her hands, became personal. She represented the marginalized, the tenants evicted without cause, the workers cheated of wages, the young men and women whose only crime was being born into the wrong neighborhood. Courtrooms became her battlegrounds. She learned to face down opposing counsels with deeper pockets, judges with raised eyebrows, and systems that were not designed for her clients to win. But time and again, she stood firm. Every dismissal of her arguments only steeled her resolve. Every attempt to silence her only proved why she needed to speak louder. But courage in court was only the beginning. Crockett carried her fight to politics. Knowing the very systems she challenged in court were written in legislative halls where voices like hers had long been excluded, her rise in politics was not handed to her. It was clawed, inch by inch, against odds stacked tall. She entered a space dominated by wealth, connections, and pedigrees she did not have. What she carried instead was authenticity and unshakable sense that she was there not for herself, but for the people who had been ignored for too long, and that authenticity cut through. Her speeches weren't polished for sound bites. They were raw, unfiltered, and deeply human. She called out hypocrisy with a precision that made opponents squirm. She spoke truth even when it made colleagues uncomfortable. And when pundits tried to dismiss her as too loud, too angry, or too inexperienced, she met those labels with fire. She knew the coded language of dismissal. She knew the double standards aimed at women in politics, especially black women. And instead of shrinking, she leaned into it, making her authenticity her strength. That's what made her dangerous to figures like Musk. She could not be bought. She could not be flattered, and she could not be rattled by arrogance masquerading as genius. Where Musk's power came from billions, Crockett's power came from something deeper: survival. She had already lived through battles that no amount of money could erase: racism that questioned her belonging, sexism that questioned her capability, and systemic barriers that questioned her worth. Every slight became armor. Every dismissal became fuel. It is easy to mock someone who has never faced true hardship. It is harder to mock someone who has stared hardship in the face and refused to bow. Crockett's composure in that studio, her unshaken calm in the presence of Musk's wealth and influence, was not an act. It was the muscle memory of a woman who had been underestimated her entire life, had learned how to turn that underestimation into victory. In her story, audiences saw themselves reflected. The immigrant told they didn't belong. The worker told they were replaceable. The woman told her voice was too much. Crockett was carrying them all into that moment. She wasn't just Jasmine Crockett, Congresswoman from Texas. She was a vessel for every American who had ever been told to sit down and stay quiet. And that is what Elon Musk didn't see. He thought he was playing a game of power, billionaire versus politician. What he didn't realize was that Jasmine Crockett's real strength wasn't her title or her seat in Congress. It was the years of being overlooked, underestimated, and disrespected. It was the struggle that had built her into someone who didn't need wealth to wield power. She had walked through fire long before Musk tried to throw sparks. And those very struggles would arm her with the weapon Musk never saw coming. Asterisk, the silence in the studio was nearly unbearable. Taut string ready to snap. Elon Musk, sensing an opening, leaned forward, his smirk sharper now, eyes gleaming with the thrill of confrontation. "People like you wouldn't last a day running a company," he said, voice dripping with condescension. The words weren't just meant to insult. They were a challenge. A declaration that he believed his power placed him above consequence. The audience shifted in their seats. Some stifled gasps. Others exchanged quick, incredulous glances. Social media feeds exploded in real time. Tweets appeared faster than anyone could read. Hashtag Musk vs. Crockett. She's about to show him. Don't let him bully you. Every notification ping felt like another heartbeat in the room, quickening the tension. Asterisk, Jasmine Crockett said nothing. She didn't flinch. She didn't respond immediately. Her calm, deliberate stillness was almost theatrical, a pause that stretched seconds into eternities. Musk's smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second, as if he sensed the moment slipping from his control. The billionaire was accustomed to immediate submission. This composed defiance was unfamiliar territory. He tried again, raising the stakes, his tone sharper, almost taunting. "Honestly, Congresswoman, some of us play in leagues that you can't even imagine. Leading a company, making decisions that affect millions, it's not about courage. It's about vision. Something people, like you, simply don't have." A murmur ran through the room. Cameras captured the split-second reactions of the audience, the raised eyebrows, the tight lips, the subtle shaking of heads. The words were heavy, intended to humiliate, but Crockett remained a pillar of composure. Her calmness was louder than any clap or cheer, resonating more powerfully than Musk's boasts. The tension was mirrored online. Clips from the debate began trending even before the segment ended. Viewers debated in real time. Is she going to answer? Can she turn this around? Every viewer understood that the weight of history, optics, and principle was pressing down on this tiny stage. This wasn't just a clash between two personalities. It was a battle over narrative. Over who could claim authority without arrogance, authenticity without wealth. Asterisk, Musk, sensing the pause as a form of resistance, escalated his rhetoric further. He leaned closer, lowering his voice in a near whisper that the cameras picked up perfectly. "The truth is, some people just aren't built for the pressure, the responsibility, the stakes. You may talk about justice, Congresswoman, but talk won't protect you in the real world." Crockett's gaze never wavered. She absorbed his words like a still lake absorbing the storm. She allowed the room, the cameras, the millions of eyes online, to feel the weight of Musk's arrogance. And then she let them feel her calm, a quiet but powerful signal that this wasn't about fear. This wasn't about intimidation. This was about listening, assessing, preparing a response that would strike with precision. Every subtle shift, the twitch of a finger, the tightening of a jaw, the faint nod from a supporter in the back, added to the drama. The studio became a pressure cooker of anticipation. Musk had thrown his gauntlet. The audience, both live and digital, leaned forward. Every heartbeat in the room matched the unspoken question. Will she fold, or will she respond? Asterisk, and that is when the energy in the room became almost tangible. Camera zoomed in on her face, capturing a calm that was almost defiant. Social media exploded in unison, as if the collective consciousness of millions were holding their breath. The debate had become more than words, it was a proving ground, a stage where dignity faced arrogance head-on. The tension hung in the air, electric and undeniable. Every person watching knew that what came next would not just be another rebuttal. It would define the night, the narrative, and perhaps even the perception of power itself. The stage was set. The world was watching, and Jasmine Crockett's response was about to echo across America. Jasmine Crockett's eyes met Elon Musk's calm, unwavering, and filled with a quiet intensity that made the billionaire's arrogance falter for just the first time. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean forward or gesture wildly. She simply began, each word measured, deliberate, and heavy with truth. "Mr. Musk," she said, her tone steady, "you speak of leadership and responsibility as if your billions give you wisdom beyond reproach. Yet the very history of your decisions tells a different story." The studio fell silent. The hum of the cameras, the soft whir of microphones, the restless shifting of the audience, all faded into the weight of her words. Musk blinked, just once, as if trying to recalibrate. But Crockett didn't let him off the hook. "You boast about free speech," she continued, her voice smooth but pointed, and yet time and again, "you silence dissent, suspend critics, and reward loyalty over principle. You claim vision, yet thousands were laid off overnight without warning, stripped of their livelihoods, while you proclaimed efficiency. You speak of courage, yet the true courage is standing accountable, not hiding behind followers and fortune." Her words were surgical. They didn't just challenge him, they highlighted a pattern, a history of arrogance disguised as innovation. Every phrase landed with precision, a logical dismantling of the narrative Musk had built around himself. And the brilliance of her strategy was that she never yelled, never sneered, never lowered herself to the bait. The calmness made the sting sharper. Crockett's eyes swept the room, acknowledging the audience and the millions watching online. "I stand here," she said, "not for myself, but for the countless Americans whose voices have been dismissed, whose labor has been undervalued, whose dignity has been threatened by people who believe that power comes from money alone. The truth is, real leadership isn't about the size of your bank account. It's about the courage to serve, the integrity to speak, and the responsibility to lift others up, not push them down." Her words resonated like a chord struck perfectly in a silent hall. The audience leaned in, some audibly whispering, some nodding in agreement, as if recognizing the mirror she held up to their own frustrations and fears. On social media, live reactions surged. Clips of her calm yet damning statements went viral within seconds. Hashtags like hashtag Crockett clap back and hashtag dignity over arrogance spiked, trending on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Millions of viewers were sharing, commenting, debating, each one witnessing what felt like a real-time act of justice. Asterisk Musk's smirk, so carefully curated, began to fade. His body language shifted, subtly shoulders tightening, lips pressing into a line, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He tried to interject, but Crockett held the space, refusing to be interrupted. She didn't need to shout over him. The calm authority in her voice demanded attention, forced reflection. It made every audience member aware of the imbalance in power. Then she delivered the social sting. It's the subtle, yet undeniable moment that would define the encounter. The threat to fire someone for speaking truth isn't just arrogance. It's a reminder that some believe authority can silence justice. But the people are not pawns. Millions are watching. And those who think power is theirs to wield over others will always meet accountability in unexpected ways. Her words were not mere rhetoric, they were a mirror. Musk was no longer just the billionaire, the tech visionary, the provocateur. In that room, in front of cameras and millions online, he became the embodiment of unchecked arrogance. cautionary tale of power wielded without conscience. Crockett had transformed his threat into a platform for dignity, making him the story's villain without raising her voice. Crockett paused, letting the silence deepen. Every second stretched like an eternity, the tension coiling tighter with each heartbeat. The world seemed to hold its breath. Even the moderator, long accustomed to controlling debates, had no words to fill the void. The cameras lingered on Musk, whose smirk was now gone, placed by the faintest shadow of unease. And let's be clear. She said, her tone unwavering, threats do not define leadership. Actions do. Respect does. Service does. And anyone who believes intimidation is proof of power has not truly understood what it means to lead. True strength is measured by courage, by integrity, by the ability to uplift rather than diminish. Asterisk, the effect was immediate. The audience broke into applause, subtle at first, then swelling as the gravity of what had occurred sank in. Some rose to their feet, chanting her name. Cameras captured every reaction, every gasp, every nod. Musk tried to speak again, but the moment had passed. Words alone could not undo the impact of truth delivered calmly, decisively, and with moral authority.
Online, the storm was instantaneous.
Analysts dissected her statements. Clips were looped and shared across millions of timelines. And commentators hailed her composure as historic. Social media erupted with memes, threads, and debates. The story was no longer just about a billionaire. Threatening a congresswoman, it was about the victory of integrity over intimidation. Of dignity over arrogance. Crockett's final words landed like a hammer. And for those watching, remember this. Threats are loud, but truth is louder. And when you stand for what is right, even the most powerful must pause, listen, and reckon with their actions. The silence that followed was cinematic in its intensity. Musk's posture had changed. The air felt heavy with the acknowledgement of defeat, not in words, but in presence. Crockett didn't need a mic drop. The world was already witnessing it. And then she let herself exhale slightly. The faintest smile playing on her lips, not triumphalist, not gloating, but resolute. Asterisk, because in that moment, she had done more than defend herself. She had defended millions. She had redefined what it meant to confront power with grace. She had shown that arrogance, no matter how colossal, could be countered by composure, clarity, and courage. And the internet had just witnessed a reversal no one could stop talking about. Asterisk, the moment Jasmine Crockett's words hit the airwaves, the world shifted. Social media erupted in a torrent of reaction, a wave so massive it seemed to stretch across every platform simultaneously. Hashtags like hashtag Crockett clap back, hashtag dignity over arrogance, and hashtag truth wins surged into trending lists, climbing faster than anyone could track. Memes began appearing within minutes, images of Musk with exaggerated smirks juxtaposed against Crockett's calm, its unwavering stare, captions highlighting the irony of arrogance meeting accountability. Within hours, the clips of her measured yet devastating rebuttal had been shared millions of times. Analysts, journalists, and commentators poured in, dissecting every nuance of her delivery. She didn't just respond, one pundit tweeted. She rewrote the narrative of power versus principle in real time. Celebrities joined the chorus, sharing their admiration. Athletes, actors, and public figures praised her courage, some framing her calm defiance as a lesson in leadership. Online forums buzzed with discussion, debates igniting among viewers from all walks of life. The conversation was no longer simply about Musk versus Crockett, had become a story about truth confronting wealth, integrity confronting arrogance, courage confronting intimidation. Asterisk, meanwhile, Musk's defenders scrambled. Loyalists attempted to spin the encounter, claiming he was just joking, that his comments were misinterpreted, or that the narrative was being unfairly shaped by public sentiment. But the calm, factual, and morally grounded response Crockett had delivered was too powerful to be undermined by excuses. Her words had been captured in pristine, replayable moments. They couldn't be silenced, edited, or dismissed. The narrative was no longer his to control. The power dynamic that Musk had assumed was firmly reversed in the court of public opinion. The cultural ripple effect was immediate. Late-night shows replayed the exchange, highlighting Crockett's composure and logic against Musk's faltering smirk. Political commentators used it as a case study of how moral courage could topple the illusion of untouchable power. Memes became shorthand for discussions about authenticity and accountability. Ordinary people shared her statements as if they were personal victories: immigrants, workers, young leaders. And anyone who had ever been underestimated or silenced recognized themselves in her calm, unshakable presence. Asterisk, this was more than a viral moment. It was a movement of validation. Crockett's performance symbolized a broader truth that public platforms do not guarantee moral authority, that wealth does not ensure ethical behavior, and that integrity, when exercised boldly, resonates far beyond the immediate arena. People who had felt overlooked, dismissed, or marginalized saw her as a mirror of their struggles and a beacon of possibility. They cheered her not because she had bested a billionaire, but because she had spoken with authenticity when the world expected her to flinch. Asterisk. The media frenzy only amplified the effect. Every news outlet, from national networks to local newspapers, ran pieces analyzing the confrontation. Headlines framed her as the voice of the people against unchecked power, a representative who refused to be bullied or silenced. Analysts compared her calm, principled rebuttal to historical moments when individuals had stood against authority and changed public perception. The story became a touchstone for conversations about leadership, accountability, and moral courage, extending far beyond the confines of a single broadcast. Even in Musk's own circles, the impact was felt. Advisors and PR teams worked overtime, trying to contain the fallout, but the narrative had already solidified. The image of arrogance being humbled by composed, factual eloquence had imprinted itself on the public consciousness. Attempts to defend or excuse Musk felt hollow, reactive, and, in many ways, irrelevant. The narrative had shifted permanently. The public overwhelmingly rallied behind the figure who had chosen dignity over fear. By the end of the day, the hashtag trends, viral clips, and commentary had solidified a simple truth: authenticity commands loyalty, respect, and power that money alone cannot buy. Millions of viewers had witnessed not just a political confrontation, but a reaffirmation of values, truth, courage, and integrity triumphing over intimidation and hubris. Across social media, people shared their own stories, drawing inspiration from Crockett's example. Immigrants tweeted about standing firm in their communities. Workers shared experiences of being underestimated in their jobs. Young leaders posted pledges to speak up when they saw injustice. The response transcended admiration, it became participatory. A collective acknowledgement that courage resonates when it is rooted in principle. And so, the shockwaves rippled outward, unstoppable and undeniable. In a world often dominated by power, wealth, and influence, Jasmine Crockett had demonstrated that authenticity, composure, and moral courage could not only withstand arrogance, but redefine the conversation entirely. The stage had been set, the message delivered, and the public had taken notice. The world had seen that calm dignity could dismantle arrogance, and that courage could be louder than wealth. And in that reverberation, audiences everywhere felt the exhilaration of witnessing a moment that would be remembered for years to come. As the echoes of the confrontation reverberated across airwaves and timelines, Jasmine Crockett took a moment to step beyond the personal. She didn't frame the episode as a battle between herself and Elon Musk, because in truth it had always been bigger than that. With measured calm, she addressed the nation, her voice steady, eyes filled with the quiet power of conviction. "This isn't about me versus Elon Musk," she said. "It's about truth versus intimidation. It's about the voices that are often silenced, the people who are overlooked, and the systems that tell ordinary citizens they are expendable. Tonight, we witnessed a choice: to cower before power, or to stand firm in principle. And I chose the latter, not for myself, but for every American who has ever been told they don't matter." Her words transformed a moment of tension into a universal lesson. She reframed the encounter from a viral spectacle into a demonstration of enduring values. Dignity, she reminded the public, cannot be purchased. Arrogance, no matter how towering, can always be met with calm clarity and moral courage. Money might command attention, influence, and fear, but it cannot dictate justice, respect, or principle. Jasmine's narrative lifted the confrontation into something cinematic, almost archetypal, the small, principled individual standing against unchecked power. She elevated her own calm into a mirror for the audience, a call to recognize their own strength and agency. Leadership isn't about wealth, followers, or titles, she continued. It's about integrity. It's about service. It's about standing for what is right, even when the spotlight is intense and the opposition is formidable. Asterisk, the crescendo of her message resonated across the nation. Ordinary citizens, viewers, and social media audiences felt it viscerally. Her words weren't just rhetoric, they were validation, an acknowledgement of shared struggle and resilience. People saw themselves in her, and they felt a renewed sense of agency. Immigrants, workers, young leaders, and everyday Americans recognized that courage does not always roar. Sometimes it is measured, composed, and deliberate-hand, yet it can move mountains. Jasmine crystallized the moral clarity of the moment with a simple, yet powerful declaration. This wasn't just a clapback. It was a reminder that America still belongs to its people, that the voices of ordinary citizens matter, that dignity will always outshine arrogance, and that calm truth will always prevail over empty intimidation. She spoke not only to her supporters, but to critics, skeptics, and observers. Her framing invited reflection. When faced with power, when confronted by intimidation, how will we respond? Will we bow, or will we stand? Will we speak, or will we stay silent? In elevating the moment, Crockett reminded viewers that moral courage is not rare. It is accessible to anyone willing to embrace it. Asterisk, even the media picked up on the resonance. Commentators hailed her as a symbol of principled resistance. Opinion pieces celebrated how her composure transformed what could have been a simple viral incident into a defining narrative about power, integrity, and responsibility. Public reaction, already fervent during the debate, now deepened into genuine inspiration. People were not just watching, they were internalizing the lesson. In the end, the encounter between Crockett and Musk became more than news. It became a touchstone for conversation about leadership, influence, and the values that sustain a nation. Crockett had turned a moment of potential intimidation into a masterclass in ethical authority, showing that, even in the face of wealth and influence, the voice of principle carries weight. Her closing words lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling, a reminder that in a society often dominated by money and spectacle, courage, integrity, and dignity remain the true currency of influence. This moment wasn't just a clash, it was a reaffirmation that authenticity and moral clarity have the power to reshape the narrative, inspire a nation, and echo far beyond the spotlight of any one stage. Asterisk, and in that reflection, the audience found not only admiration for Jasmine Crockett, but a deeper sense of empowerment, a recognition that the strength she displayed was a strength we all possess when we choose principle over fear. Asterisk, the cameras cut to a wider shot, capturing Jasmine Crockett standing resolute, the room still buzzing from the confrontation. The story had already begun to ripple across the nation, but she knew the moment was bigger than herself. Turning to the audience, she offered a reflection that carried both clarity and inspiration. If you believe that truth matters more than intimidation, that dignity always outshines arrogance, that the voices of ordinary people cannot be silenced, then share this story, she said, because this isn't about me. It's about every American who has ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told they don't belong. This is about standing firm, speaking up, and knowing that your courage can move the world. The impact wasn't just rhetorical. Viewers had already begun posting, commenting, and spreading the moment far beyond the broadcast. Social media feeds continued to light up with hashtag Crockett Clapback, Debates flourished, and ordinary people recognized themselves in her calm defiance. Every share, every discussion, every acknowledgement amplified the moral of the story. Authenticity and principle cannot be bought or silenced. Subscribe for more stories where courage meets truth, where integrity triumphs over arrogance, and where the voices of the people are heard above all else, she concluded. Be part of a movement that values moral clarity. And remember, you have the power to stand tall, no matter who tries to intimidate you. The camera lingered on her composed expression, the quiet strength that had defined every word she had spoken. And as the broadcast faded, one truth remained clear. This wasn't just a viral moment. It was a reminder that justice, dignity, and courage always have a stage, and that the audience, inspired and empowered, had a role to play in keeping those values alive.